We have long known that climate change is coming for Boston's coastline. For years, scientific reports have shown us just how much of the city and the state will end up underwater if we don't take major action and fast. The good news, there are a lot of ideas out there about how to protect against rising seas, but as a rule, they aren't cheap. That includes a proposal for a floodgate in Fort Point Channel with movable barriers that would block off the harbor during major storms so stormwater from other Boston neighborhoods could drain into it instead of getting backed up and causing massive flooding elsewhere. But as John Chesto points out in the Boston Globe, right now that floodgate has an eye-popping price tag in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and no one seems especially eager to line up to foot the bill. John, a business and politics reporter for the Globe, joins me now, as does Joan Fitzgerald. She's a professor in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University and the lead researcher on the inaugural Boston Climate Progress Report for the Boston Foundation. She argued in a recent Globe op-ed that Massachusetts needs a new statewide agency to manage projects like these and to make sure that future mitigation efforts don't cause more problems than they solve. John Chesto, Joan Fitzgerald, thank you both for being here. So John, the project in Fort Point Channel, the proposed project, is the brainchild of John Sullivan, the chief engineer at the Boston Water and Sewer Commission. Can you explain it in the simplest terms possible? Because it took me more time than I would have expected to wrap my brain around it.
I'm going to try to. He wants to turn the Fort Point Channel, which rises and falls by at least 10 feet during low tide and high tide, into a sort of bathtub at low tide that can store all the rainwater that comes in. So
from elsewhere, right?
Yes, it's a nexus point for drain pipes from all over crucial parts of the city in, downtown, South Boston, Dorchester, South End. A lot of that rainwater flows right into Fort Point Channel. And, John Sullivan was actually sitting at the Barking Crab one day looking out at the Fort Point Channel, noticed the tide was really low and thought, oh, maybe I could store some rainwater there. But in order to do it, he needs to have gates that'll shut the Fort Point Channel at low tide,
yep.
And then there'll be room to kind of the difference, which is millions and millions of gallons of rainwater you could store there. The idea is if you don't store that water and it's high tide and the storm comes in, a really bad storm, and he would only do this or it would be someone else because he's on his 51st year in the agency. But Boston Water and Sewer or whoever runs this would only do it in a really bad storm. That storm would push against all that rainwater coming out, and then it would back up and flood hundreds of acres.
We've got a couple artist renderings that I want to show really quick in part just because I think artist renderings of this stuff tend to be cool. First, we have an image of a possible design for the floodgates. In this particular image that you're looking at right here, it's combined with the Northern Avenue Bridge, which may or may not get built, but you see those gates on the bottom, they're open right there, could be closed by a couple alternate mechanisms, as you said, at low tide. And then the other image I want to show, you were talking about flooding in a cataclysmic storm. On the left there, we have one projection for a cataclysmic storm in which this floodgate does not exist. You see red flooding, stormwater backed up all around the center of Boston. And then the image on the right is diminished flooding with stormwater not being backed up as badly if these gates were built. So that drives home, that helps, I think, visualize some of the points that you raised. Really quickly, before we get to Joan, would this also protect the seaport from flooding?
I would protect a lot of the seaport. Basically, any of the, because the seaport's right there on Fort Point Channel, some of that area does drain in.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you remember that dumpster, that floating down
I do remember that
Congress Street,
yeah.
I think, one of those seaport roads, I think that was probably rainwater, not ocean water. So, I mean, the seaport's definitely affected by rainwater flooding.
A benefit for that neighborhood, too. Okay, Joan Fitzgerald, in that Boston Globe op-ed, you and your co-authors, Julie Wormser and Jonathan LaMontagne, argued that Massachusetts needs a new coastal adaptation agency. Can you explain why it doesn't make sense or why it isn't enough to let individual communities like Boston, Revere, Everett, other places south of the city, why not let individual coastal communities come up with their own individual solutions?
Well, I think the first and most important reason is that nature ignores political boundaries. And so when you have coastal flooding, it's not just going to occur on the Boston coastline. It's going to affect the whole harbor. It's going to affect the whole state's coastline. And so when we look at what happens when cities and towns are forced to address that individually, some cities have more ability to do so. But even Boston, you know, as we just heard, we're talking hundreds of millions. And so there's Joe Moakley Park that employs both hard structures and nature-based solutions, millions of dollars to put into that. And so there's a disparity in what Everett or Chelsea can afford to do and what Boston can afford to do. Then there's the possibility of what one community does affects the other community. And so by having a statewide agency that's prioritizing the most vulnerable spots, and also examining systems like the T, Logan Airport, and so forth, you get a much more comprehensive and effective solution.
And just to draw out a point that you just touched on, it's possible that, for example, if Boston took a particular step, that there could be a negative effect on nearby communities, right? Something that's good for Boston proper might not help the communities to the north or south on the coast. Is that right?
Well, we don't know that for sure, and it depends on the type of solution being employed, and that would be part of what a state agency could examine.
Okay, Joan, another question for you. Governor Healy made a big point early in her tenure of creating a new climate chief position tasked with coordinating the state's response to climate change across multiple agencies. If Melissa Hoffer, who Healy tapped for this post, does her job right, what would a new agency provide that Hoffer, acting alone, could not?
Well, I think Hoffer could be definitely part of that and lead that. But I think what has to happen is there has to be some kind of process where the coastal communities are weighing in, where the MBTA is part of it, Logan Airport. So there has to be more input in the planning process. And that could be organized in a number of ways. In this, we hit upon the idea of a state agency kind of basing it on what happened with the cleanup of Boston Harbor. And so the MWRA was created for that. It and had a special division that was its whole job. And then that was dismantled when it was done. And then maybe at that point, it could go back under the climate czar.
Got it. John, the plan that John Sullivan is putting out there, as Joan just mentioned, is not cheap. When you wrote about it a couple years ago, I think the price tag was somewhere in maybe a couple $100 million.
It's gone up now that he's got engineers actually looking at it.
Yeah, now you have the most impressive iteration is, I think, 750 million, kind of drifting up toward that 1 billion mark. When it comes to Boston stakeholders, who is intrigued or interested in supporting Sullivan's plan, and who's balking at it?
Well, you know, he has been going around, and I would say that there isn't anyone that's been blocking it. You know, the mayor.
She didn't sound too excited.
No, she would love to see what she says nature-based solutions, which means using wetlands or hills and berms to kind of prevent bad flooding. But the reality is you're going to need a mix. And the Charles River Watershed Association actually seems very intrigued, and they tend to prefer nature-based solutions as well. They are like, yeah, let's get this going because we got to put both on the table. And the big question, and it's a question that Joan brought up, is should we be bringing in other cities?
Yeah.
You know, John Sullivan is at Boston Water and Sewer, so he looked at, you know, he didn't just look at Fort Point Channel, he looked at other parts of the city, but he looked at East Boston and Charlestown. But what about Everett and Chelsea, which are sort of right across the water from those places? We need to get them involved in the conversation too.
Joan, the project that we've been talking about here, as we just mentioned, is not cheap. I'm wondering how much you think the state needs to be ready to spend in the coming years to do climate adaptation and protect coastal communities. What sort of price tag should people have in mind?
I don't think anyone has the exact answer to that. I mean, the cost for Boston alone is estimated to be about 1.7 billion to 3 billion. So depending on what's needed in the other communities. So I couldn't tell you an exact price, but I can tell you how limited the available funding is. So for example, as we talked about, with FEMA building resilient infrastructure, that's $50 million a year. It's competitive. It's hard to apply for. So there will have to be some dedicated funding stream. And I think that's one of the first things the state agency would have to do is just figure out how much money we're talking about.
Given the numbers that we're talking about here, I have to say I wonder what the political appetite would be, because people don't like to come up with new revenue sources for new funding streams. I'm not saying, I mean, it seems like there's a huge need, but I do wonder how it would go over at the State House. John, in the business world, which you covered, do you think there might be an appetite for the kind of solution that Joan and her colleagues floated?
I think there's an appetite for, yes, I do think there'd be an appetite for an agency. Maybe it's statewide, maybe it's like the MWRA, which is really Boston Harbor specific or Massachusetts Bay specific. You know, something that can actually borrow money so that you don't have to write a check up front. You know, a bonding authority like the MWRA would be really helpful in this situation.
Joan, a lot of Massachusetts is nowhere near the coast. And I can imagine a viewer watching this conversation, say, who lives in the Worcester area, and thinking, you know, if you're a developer who decided to build in the seaport, or if you're a condo owner who bought on the waterfront in East Boston because you like the view, you made those choices freely. I shouldn't be expected to be part of footing the bill for decisions you made that in retrospect look like they weren't the right ones to make. What would you say to that kind of hypothetical objection or skepticism?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First, it may be that it would be Massachusetts Bay, that it be a more regional organization under the executive office supervising it. I think John's point that it has to have bonding authority is critical in terms of funding it. But there are stormwater problems. There are problems throughout the state. So I can understand Western Massachusetts may not be as invested, but I think as a state in terms of highways, roads, and so forth, that protecting that Boston, harbor is particularly important for the whole state. But to the property owner element of this, there definitely is room for public-private partnerships in funding these initiatives.
Are there examples of other states taking the sort of step that you and your co-authors suggested in the op-ed? Is anyone doing this elsewhere right now?
The state that I thought that had an interesting example is Maryland, where the state legislature granted designation of regional authorities, and they had both bonding and they also had private sector solutions that provided benefits to the city. And I thought it's in the report. We discussed that at length as an alternative approach that would be more regional in nature.
All right, I think we have to leave it there. Joan Fitzgerald and John Chesto, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.